Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Psykhe podcast, where we're all about having honest conversations with people, sharing their life experiences and how you can support your mental well-being. So we're here to inform, inspire and empower you to live a joyful, meaningful and healthy life. And whilst we're doing that, to challenge misconceptions and stigma and raise awareness of mental health, mental well-being. And we're super excited, or I'm super excited to have you back this week. I hope you enjoyed the double drop that we had last week with 2 episodes. We're back to just our regular one this week, and it is an awesome episode. I've really enjoyed listening back through whilst I've been editing. We're joined this week by Craig, who will introduce himself a bit more, who is another fellow podcaster. And we're going to go a bit into men's mental health again. I know we did that back in episode 22 with Henry. We're going to talk about men's mental health again, and quite a lot into substance abuse and addiction and childhood trauma and all that kind of stuff. And as I've said, this is something that we like to do here, is to have these honest conversations about topics that are sometimes just not talked about. And the reason that a lot of them are not talked about is shame. And it's actually something I've written a blog post about this week, when I'd noticed this feeling of shame in myself. And it basically came about, I've revamped my website, moved across to a new site, same web address, www.psykhe.co.uk, Psykhe, Psykhe, and just something that is a bit more, streamlined and I guess kind of professional looking, but with more personality in it, because I just really wanted it to be something that felt like me, that felt authentic. And it could be linked to the fact that I finally, I talked about it in the first ever episode, reading It Starts With Why by Simon Sinek. And I have finally today finished reading the book. It's taken me a while, but I just feel really inspired by it. I would definitely recommend it if you're someone who is struggling with feeling a sense of kind of purpose or direction and that kind of thing. It really helped me. And I think there is so much for anyone who is trying to start their own business. There is so much about the right way to do it, air quotes, right way, the way that it's going to get you leads and get you interest and whatever. And I'm sure a lot of it does work really well, but sometimes I just feel like it's not really me, and it's about making loads of money, and there's nothing wrong with making money. I think at the moment it's something that unfortunately some people are trying to profit off of the current situation, and that is, personally I just don't think that's ethical, but that's me. But you know what I mean, though, in the kind of profiting off it, making a living and having your business is different to sort of ramping up prices because of it. There's a clear distinction there. But it really helped me to sort of think about the why I'm doing what I'm doing, why this podcast exists, why I've got into coaching, and to really think about all that. So I was reading that. And so the new website is much more, professional looking, but personal feeling, I guess, is the way. So definitely check it out. Let me know what you think. And I was copying across the blog posts on the old website, and then I just had this real sense of shame about some of them. And there's a new blog post up, which is all about that, kind of recognizing that feeling and going, ugh, what is this all about? And I copied across all of the blog posts, even the ones I'd felt some shame about. So they're all there, but it just was kind of my moment of shame this week. But that's something we get into. We talk a lot about emotionally healthy role models and what they look like, and it's something that I had an interview with a guest last week, which won't be on for a little while, but we talked really about child mental health and wellness, and I think that being a role model, not just to children in your life but to others around you, is really important. And that's something I've definitely been thinking about, because full disclosure, the last week my gym habit has slipped. Obviously staying at home, I'm not going out apart from the essentials, and my bit of exercise is walking the dog, which is not particularly far because he's a little old man. So I had been doing my early morning gym session at home. Last week, I just didn't. I slept in. I think I did need to catch up on sleep, but I've been making not the best food choices in that I've been sort of mindlessly eating a lot of chocolate and not really nurturing myself. That's something this week I'm going to really focus on, because I feel better when I look after myself. And actually it's quite funny because we did talk about food as well, and sugar and caffeine and all of that. So it's, I think, a really informative conversation, really interesting to talk about addiction, which is something that we've not touched on yet. And the last thing I kind of wanted to mention was we recorded this interview back in February. So the world looked very different then to how it does now. And what's interesting is I make a mention to the floods that we'd had, I think earlier in February in the UK, and about how we can take things for granted that are always there, and how the floods had made me realise like how much I took for granted, obviously having electricity and having a dry house and having a shower, a warm shower, and how we just take things for granted. And I think at the moment, again, our world looks different, and we're thinking about the things we've maybe taken for granted. And that could be school for children. It could be just meeting up with friends, or going to the cinema, or popping to a cafe, and all these things that we've maybe taken for granted. And suddenly, I personally have been really reflecting on my priorities and the things that are important to me, because suddenly when there are these restrictions, I guess you kind of see what's important. And I think for a lot of people, it's not all the stuff that we have in our houses. And it comes back to that materialistic versus experiential life, doesn't it? That we quite often in our society focus on stuff, having the best car, the best clothes, or whatever. Lots of books. I'm not going to apologise for having lots of books because actually they are something that does bring me joy, and that has been comforting. I've been reading a lot more. But we have sometimes that obsession about stuff. And now what we're finding is, people have to stay at home with all their stuff, and people don't want to. I know today, I'm recording this on Sunday, Saturday and Sunday, there were images in the UK of people going out and sunbathing and things that, are nice to do, but we're in the middle of a crisis. We're supposed to be staying at home, and people are struggling with that. And I just think it really shows that we might have this materialistic obsession, but they are not the things really that make us happy and bring us joy. It is being outside in nature, which is something that's come up quite a lot. Moving in nature. You keep seeing people cycling and running, and I wish I could go wild swimming, but that's not on the sort of list of exercises that are okay, so it wouldn't be an essential trip. So that's something that I'm really missing. And it just really, I think, reinforces that joy doesn't come from things. They're nice to have. They can give us a boost. The clothes that we wear might feel like they're a part of our identity in some way and how we express ourselves, but they are not the most crucial things to our happiness and to our well-being. It is that connection with people. It is being outside. It's contributing. I mean, the numbers of people who have volunteered to help the NHS, or who have volunteered. I know our local town council has been having volunteers, and I've volunteered for both of those things. But I think so many people have that in reality, the chances of actually being called to do anything are quite small. But contribution, connection with people, and just being able to be outside and make the most of life, they're the things that are really important. So I guess to sum up my little waffling bit at the beginning, I guess I'm hoping that out of all of this comes a greater appreciation for the things that are really important to us and the things that really nurture us and bring us joy in our life. And that is what we're all about here. I'm going to pass over to the conversation with Craig. I hope you enjoy our discussion. I really enjoyed talking to Craig, so thank you to him for joining us. And his podcast, I'm going to say it here, he'll mention it and at the end, but his Happy You're Here podcast, I would absolutely recommend checking out if you want to hear more of him. So let's dive in. Hi everyone, and welcome back and I'm really excited to introduce this week's guest, Craig. So, Craig, if you could introduce yourself to the listeners and tell us a little bit about you.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. I am a podcast host as well. I host a show called Happy You're Here. I'm trying to make it a show about tools, techniques, and ideas for people to live more fulfilled lives. A lot of my listener base are men, especially here in the United States, we have a pretty drastic mental health crisis in our country, and in most of the modernized world. And I see there's pretty significant statistics about the way that men specifically are affected by drug and alcohol use and suicide in the US. And I'm sure it's the same in Europe. And it's just because we're not taught the tools to really cope and manage our mental health.
Yeah, I know it's absolutely the same here in the UK, mental health generally, and then men-specific mental health. Yeah. One of the things this is like my last question, but I don't know whether we'll throw it in here or kind of hint at it. So on the Psykhe podcast, we talk a lot about mental wellness, and we also like to leave people with tips and strategies. So hopefully some of the kind of things that you talk about in your podcast will be relevant when we get to that place as well. But I really would like to, if we can, to maybe talk a bit more about addiction and drugs and alcohol, because that's something, one, that we've not talked about really on the podcast yet. And I always like to add new stuff. And
I feel like I talk about it way too much on my podcast.
Yeah.
But it's an important topic.
Yeah, and I think there are certain topics that people maybe feel uncomfortable talking about. And so I think this is a good platform to have honest, open conversations about them and just make it feel a bit more okay to talk about them.
Yeah, absolutely. My background is actually, I'm a recovering addict myself, and that's how I first got into even really becoming self-aware about my mental health and learned about mindfulness and meditation. A lot of kind of the healing stuff that I've gotten involved in has all been as a reaction of my recovery. Because I started to, there's a thing that happens and it's kind of in AA, is a lot of addicts, when they do get sober, which is great, they spend the rest of their lives just abstaining from the activity rather than actually recovering and learning how to live again and learning how to heal a lot of the traumas and the issues that caused them to find refuge in drugs and alcohol in the first place, which everyone has a reason for it, whether it's boredom with life and they're just trying to have fun. That's a lot of times how it starts for people, but that usually comes from something else because life is inherently pretty amazing. So if you're needing to find those things, you're not being shown, or maybe you're hiding from some things in life that have not been so ideal for you that you need to mask it. If I know for myself, it was just kind of a numbing agent on multiple levels, and it just continued to get worse and worse and worse. And, it's interesting you said about people, there's kind of a stigma around talking about it. And luckily that seems to be changing with the internet. I think people can look around and be like, oh, wow, a lot of people have these problems. And also a lot of celebrities that are now sober coming back and talking about, that everyone suffers in some way. And a lot of people find refuge in these substances, and they're becoming, unfortunately, the more and more we make them illegal, the more and more readily available they seem to become. And there's a whole plethora of issues that go along with that. But I think the key thing is teaching people that are on the cusp of becoming addicts, that having that awareness that like the thing that, this partying and stuff is not as innocent as it might seem when they're younger. Because I think I see it in younger kids that I know, and I would love to step in and help them. But I know, there's a certain point where you can't tell someone how to live their life. You can just hopefully live a good example and hope that they decide they want to follow in your footsteps, and provide them those tools and techniques and ideas just kind of on a platter and say, like, here these are if you want them. And hopefully some people at some point will decide to use those. I know for me, when I was first making the decision when I first realized I even had a problem, and then I decided I wanted to get sober, I didn't know how to do it. I still spent another year using and sleeping on pavement and stuff because I was partying and I had no real concept of how to get out of it. And the idea of like rehab seemed completely impossible to me because there's no way I could afford that. And most people that are using have spent all their money and maybe can't hold a job and are broke. So it's like we don't have universal healthcare here. So, and I don't know if it's even covered in a lot of countries, addiction recovery like rehabs and stuff. I'm sure to some degree.
Yeah, I'm just thinking whether I know there are drug and alcohol services that people can access, and whether I think some are run by the health service and some are maybe with charity, not for profits, kind of
Yeah.
filling in the gap as well.
Right.
Yeah,
We have some too. It's just like it's very scattered and it's very hard to. And also sometimes that's not the going to AA or going to rehab isn't the mode that will actually help somebody, because a lot of times again it's just that abstaining, which can be a good off ramp, but that's not gonna lead to long term healing. It's just one bad day away from falling back into it at that point, until you actually heal those traumas and start to build yourself back up.
Yeah, because I think, like you said, there is an underlying reason, and if you're trying to numb something and then you take away the thing that is serving a protective, mind blank, lost the word,
like serving its
role.
Purpose.
Role.
Yeah,
That's it. I was like, what's the word? Role. If you take that away and you haven't dealt with the reason why you are seeking something to numb, then you haven't solved the underlying issue, and then you're maybe going to find something else, or try and find something else that is going to fix it, rather than doing what is probably very difficult work of actually dealing with the inner stuff, which is
and everybody has trouble with that. I mean, everybody has some kind of traumas. I was just doing a workshop recently. It was my girlfriend's a hypnotherapist, and it was one of her workshops, and part of it is when you're in the hypnotized state, you go back to your memories, and it's weird which ones come up, because they're not usually in this state the ones that you would expect, the ones that you usually have queued up to be like, oh, this is the reason why I'm like this, right? Different memories will come up, and it'll be like, I didn't even know I remembered that. And those memories, when people go to explain them, because we share in the group, a lot of times they'll be like, well, this memory, it felt impactful, but it's not that traumatic, but here it is. And they explain it, and they kind of explain a way that like, oh, this isn't that bad. But it's like, some of them you hear and you're like, that is really traumatic. That's sad. I'm sorry that happened to you. And some of them, it's like, maybe that's not comparatively traumatic, but for a child that has and that's the thing, at some point we were all children, and something has I would be amazed if there's anyone that doesn't have any kind of trauma from their childhood, because it's just the world, and it always has been. And what is key is raising children to be able to deal with those things, to be able to deal with emotions, and if something goes wrong, how do they bounce back from that, rather than let's just repress all of our emotions, which is kind of, at least especially for men, but even for women too, is totally the route that we've been taught. And it's dangerous, because that just festers and causes it finds ways out in other ways.
Yeah. And what? I think a lot of that is we expect children just to understand emotions without actually being taught what they are. But I think for the kind of suppressing, there's almost and I'm not a parent, so I'll just throw that in as a disclaimer, but the parent, their child's upset or angry, and they can't handle that emotion. They don't want their child to be upset, because you wouldn't want them to be upset, but rather than letting them experience that emotion and then explaining it and understanding it, it's almost like, oh, no, you're not sad, you're not angry.
Yeah, don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah, don't do that. And it's because of their anxiety around the powerful emotions. And so then the child doesn't learn how to recognize it, doesn't learn how to manage it and let it out in a healthy way. And then we suppress emotions, and then.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it comes down to teaching parents, and just as ourselves, as the new generations become parents, like learning how our own brains work, learning how our own emotions work, and becoming more emotionally healthy. Because if we're more emotionally healthy, then we can, pass those mechanisms on to our children. And because they model everything we do too. So it's if we're not emotionally healthy, they're going to model that. And if we grow up and learn some better coping mechanisms and techniques to deal with our emotions and to experience those emotions healthily, then they're going to model that as well.
And I think there's something so powerful. My background's in education. And so as a teacher, if you are, obviously you have to sort of show up for the job, and you can't just spend all day moaning about, your own stuff. But if I was really tired or ill or having a bad day, I would say, I'm just, FYI, I'm tired today, or I'm not very well, or I'm a bit grumpy. And, and then you're kind of naming the emotion or what it means. and then
Yeah.
you can talk about it. And actually, if you're a parent listening to this and you are sad, to express that, and then you can have a conversation about how it's okay to be sad sometimes, and then ways that maybe you can try and lift your mood and model it and have that discussion.
Yeah, I think that would, and I know some parents that do that with their kids, and their kids are incredibly emotionally healthy and grow up to be pretty well-adjusted people because of that. And I mean, you see it a lot in like the hippie kind of community where they've, they've opened up to their emotions a lot more in that subculture, but I think it's spilling over into mainstream culture, fortunately, kind of by desperation. I think that things have gotten so bad with mental health just because we've gotten all of the material like things that we could possibly want in our society now, that we're still looking around like, why am I not happy? And
Yeah.
I think there's not much more chase that can happen for material goods, that you just see it all around us. All the people that, even if we don't have it ourselves, like we see the people that do, they're not particularly happy either, unless they do. And then you see these people that, have done this deep, like emotional healing work through whatever construct that they've done that in, or however they've conceptualized that. And those are the people that, at least for me, I gravitate towards those people. Like that is the idea of success to me, is someone that can be well-adjusted and mentally stable, and healthy throughout whatever life throws at you, whether you have or have not, whether you're dealing with stress or, and learning to do all of those things healthily is kind of essential part of being human, essential part of the human playbook that we just haven't really, I think it's really that we haven't really completely worked it out. It's not that anyone's like holding the keys and is like, oh, we're not going to show you how to do this. It's just that like it's pretty new fields of science. Obviously you've been studying mental health forever, but like it's the version of it that we're dealing with now is there's a lot of new stuff constantly coming out, because it's harder to study than it is like, why does a heart beat, right? Why does the brain do what it does?
Oh, it's a good question. It's a complicated thing. But I really like when you said there about obviously materialistic stuff. And I think there's that, I'm not going to say it's not happiness, but maybe like a more superficial happiness that comes from having things. And then there's a different type of happiness, which is about that emotional stability, or that emotional awareness and connection. And I think this sort of more true happiness, if you like, is when you have that inner.
Yeah, I like to use the differentiation between happiness and fulfillment. And happiness is the, chemical reaction of like, I get something nice and I feel happy. I'm with someone I love and I feel happy. And those are temporary. And they're only there whenever that good stimulation is there in your environment. Where fulfillment lasts through struggle and hardship and everything. And it's like all of this feels meaningful. And I feel like I'm capable of dealing with it. And that's, there's the field of positive psychology that really honed in on that word happiness for a long time. And I think recently a lot of studies have flipped and started to pay attention to the difference between happiness and fulfillment and meaning. They use that word a lot too. And because we realize that there is a difference there. You can feel happy. And I think because we've studied happiness specifically so much, and we've published all these papers about what makes people happy, now people are just chasing these temporary fixes for happiness, and then still wondering, and then it almost makes it worse, because you're like, I'm doing all of the things right. Why do I still feel this deep sadness, this deep lack of meaning in my life? Because you're not addressing that core thing.
Absolutely. I'm going to throw in two of my questions now, because it just feels, you'll see when I say why it feels like it works. And it's quite funny because I'm having a bit of a podcast recording day, and actually I spoke to someone earlier, and he viewed these two questions as almost approaching the happiness thing that you've just described from the two different angles. The first one is, what always boosts your mood, or what brings you joy? So I guess this is maybe your chemical happiness, if you like.
Yeah. So for me, it's other people. I get a little bit of satisfaction when I complete something too. I'm a little like oriented on like completing things. And when I get a podcast done, or I get a film finished, or I'm a creator by nature. So I do a lot of different creation things. And those are the things that really, make me feel, they give me that boost of that, whatever the chemicals are, the chemical concoction that's happening there. But also, people, I'm a very social person. So I go to a networking meeting, or I go to a mixer or something, a friend's party. Those are I just feel completely euphoric afterwards. But that stuff doesn't last. I go home and I end up by myself, and it just starts to fade. And then there's that like underlying, okay, what's still there? What's there by myself? in contrast to that. And that contrast is the thing that really used to get me, because it's like, well, I just felt so happy and I did all the things that are supposed to make me feel happy. And then I come home and I feel completely depressed. And it's like, okay, I feel like there's something wrong with me, and which then just furthers the depression. And that cycle just, takes you over if you don't go get another fix of that happiness chemical.
I suppose then this next question then links to the what's left, which is what makes life meaningful for you?
I think in many ways, I'm still trying to figure that out for myself. I think just within the last couple of years really I kind of like gave lip service to that idea for a long time, but I never really looked at it. I was a filmmaker and I thought that like telling stories and creating films was the thing that was that mattered to me, and that was what created meaning in my life. But after I finished my first feature film and I had done a bunch of projects and I kind of had checked off all the little boxes that I had given myself, I just felt this deep lack of meaning. And I was like, is this it? And I think the reason was because I was focused on myself and I wasn't serving other people in any way. So it's been kind of a roller coaster couple of years trying to get myself to a place where I feel like I can serve other people, and then figuring out, where do I fit in? I'm still trying to figure that out. Where do I fit in society where I can add the most value to other people? Right now it's through this podcast that and I think that, because I've done a lot of that work and I know a lot of people doing a lot of interesting, different healing work, I can kind of serve as a bridge. A lot of people have told me that throughout my life, that I serve as a bridge. I connect people, connect ideas. So maybe that is what that is. So for me, it's like my meaning, the thing that makes life meaningful for me is the journey of trying to figure out how I can serve society, humankind as a whole, best as myself.
I think it's so interesting, this idea of service, because that's something that I found when I asked this question comes up quite a lot, some element of serving other people. But I also think with meaning that maybe as you move through your life, it changes, that I don't know that you need to be like, right, I've figured out my meaning and this is it now for the rest of my life. I think it is, as we learn and as we grow, maybe it changes and we take time.
That's what I think that absolutely. Yeah. And you got to try stuff. That's what like young people, and I mean for myself, but I tell this to really young people all the time. They're like, how do I figure out what my purpose is? And it's like, try a bunch of stuff and certain things will resonate. And for me, it's like the frustrating thing is something will resonate and I'll get really good at it. And then it will stop resonating. And I think it goes to your point that like, maybe it doesn't have to be one thing forever, but if I can just kind of try to do the self work, that I can make myself the best version of myself, so that no matter what I'm doing, I'm bringing this positivity and this like energy is so like people's moods and energy is so infectious that like even just cultivating a healthy, positive attitude and healthy, positive outlook on life in yourself, just by virtue of the ripple effect of all of the people that you touch in your life, will make a positive impact on the earth. So it doesn't have to be this grand thing, but like if you are bringing that good intention and this self-awareness to everything that you do, this mindfulness to everything that you do, then you're inherently going to be serving, whether you're putting roofs on houses or serving in a restaurant or working for some nonprofit. Like no matter what you're doing, you are doing some kind of service. You're fitting into society in some way.
And I think when you're trying lots of different things, and even if you spend some time on something that resonates and then it stops resonating, like you say, you're still growing personally, but also you're picking up skills. And I think a lot of things, if you're thinking career-wise, that you can do, there are so many skills that overlap that you can take into the sort of next thing that you do. It's not just, oh, well, I've wasted 3 years doing this and now, it's not a complete waste.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think this happens a lot of time with kids that go to college and they say like, oh, I finished and now I don't want to do that career anymore. So this was a big waste of time and money. And it's like, it's not really. I mean, you can apply those skills, whatever you learn, to something else. Like I went to school for filmmaking and then immediately afterwards started working in digital marketing. And now that's my career. And even there, like I might have a job where I focus in social media management and then I go get another job in websites or something. Like it all overlaps. And those are really helpful. Or there with the podcast, if I was able to make the podcast my full-time job at some point, like all of those digital marketing skills weren't wasted because I can use those to help spread these positive ideas. So they all, everything kind of connects in some way. Even the waiting tables, when I waited tables for years, like that customer service experience, that all matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just thinking, I studied politics and international relations at university, and then I've got a master's since in a different subject in psychology, actually. But I do not use politics at all in the way I studied it. I mean,
Yeah.
obviously, there's politics in all kinds of interactions. If you're interacting with people, there's politics involved. But the skills from it, the critical analysis and developing arguments and all of that, that is a skill that I've taken, even though I mean, I remember writing assignments about international security and cyber terrorism, that kind of thing. And that has nothing to do with anything I do now, but I still have valuable skills from that time.
Yeah. I mean, everything in the world is so interconnected that you become a very valuable member of society by picking up all of the different things that and if you bring a positive attitude to it and see the way that, those things can all connect, then that makes you really valuable. I think that's what a lot of us want on some, whether we know it or not, is we want to be valuable to society.
Yeah. And I think that links back into, you mentioned about self-awareness and the mindfulness, that I think self-awareness is so important and something that's maybe undervalued by society, that being able to, whether it's your emotions